Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. These words are taken from that section of the book of Leviticus referred to precisely as the Holiness Code. And they stand out, those chapters 17 to 26, as a very spiritual part of the book of Leviticus. They probably predate the more technical part of the book, which is the main body of it, and they stand out precisely because of their spiritual tone. This, of course, comes through, and the Lord almost quotes it directly in the passage that we have today in the Gospel itself. Be perfect, teleoi in Greek. Kadosh, holy, does contain that element of perfection, but what is the perfection in question? The Lord shows that actually the fullness of the revelation is not exactly a reversal of what was given to the ancients, the law of the talion, lex talionis, where tooth for tooth was the order of the day, but something which reaches a paradox, the gospel paradox. We are called to be evangelical souls, souls with a different optic. What is this optic? Well, first of all, let us understand that the lex talionis, the law of retaliation, precisely, the same word is there, retaliation, is one that already limits considerably the damage. Now remember, people in primitive times were fairly keen on getting justice, but they could go beyond justice, and therefore they could start killing people for something which was not as grave as taking a life. So only a tooth for a tooth, not a whole life. Already it's progress, limiting the damage of savage human nature. But the Lord gives us a culture which actually can be seen over the Christian centuries. There is a vast difference between a land impermeated by Christian grace and a land which is not. Ireland here does have that element of goodness inbuilt. People are kind and considerate. It extends from the attitude of people to charity, physical charity, giving to causes, to even road rage. If one drives in countries which are, for instance, meridional or even eastern, one sees there that the accent is on getting there at all costs. I think you know what I mean. The horn is an important component in the car. Well, there is this element in other cultures, here in the calmer West, where people actually do help each other. They will let you get out if you're stuck. They will wait for you. They will not start immediately to honk. There is a certain goodness there, which is, let's say, the fruit of Christian grace for many generations. People help each other. And if one is stuck, people come out of the woodwork and they will help you. It's actually quite edifying. There is a goodness there. People forget the origin of that. And we are in danger in Europe of taking it lightly. People in Europe, because of the Christian roots, do still trust each other and they will help each other. It's part of the bottom line. A courtesy is there. It's not the same necessarily in cultures which operate from a different point of departure. So let's protect our culture, even on the human level. The specific paradox of the gospel is going even further. It's actually asking us to go the extra mile. This expression comes from the Persian system of courier, mail, message, carrying things, where the courier had to have the possibility of in an emergency, compelling people to carry the message a mile. And in the Greek, it's an example of another language influencing the Greek. It's a strange expression because in the Greek, it's used directly with the object. Compel 1 mile, it says. And the very word does actually come from the Persian, angarefe. And this is interesting because the Lord there is referring to a local situation which could actually happen in the Mediterranean basin. And so we have the Lord giving, even in that context, the heroic notion of going an extra mile. Now, with regard to the turning of the cheek, that has become part of our language, has it not? So, turning the other cheek symbolizes the action of not just examining what we have a right to. We can want vendetta straight away, and it's sad when Christians actually do that, directly or indirectly. It's very sad when human values of revenge predominate even in parts of Christian life. I mean, for instance, a coldness towards a person, even the refusal of civil contact between feuding families, that kind of thing. Things happen over a death when a will is contested. This kind of thing happens a lot in certain places. It's very sad because there are no pockets in a shroud, and if one loses one's spiritual interiority and peace and damages one's spiritual part in order to have more for the body, then we have not understood what we're here for. So the Lord is asking for a spiritual people, a kindness. There are examples over the Christian centuries of souls who have really been heroically kind and forgiving. The famous case of Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, who worked in the Vatican, the Black Pimpernel, he was all the time helping Jews during the war. And we know that the Germans were fairly keen on getting him. And the German commandant in Rome had it, as we would say, in for him. But who was it who actually got the wife and children of that commandant to safety when the Nazis were being defeated in Rome? It was that same Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty. And that kindness and goodness and forgiving nature of that holy priest was enough to get to the heart of that condemned commandant in prison, and he, by grace, was touched and converted and became a Catholic in prison. He was, before, a very dangerous man. And one could go on, naming many, many cases of heroic forgiveness. There is the way in which the soul can damage itself hugely by unforgiveness. The Desert Fathers had a whole discipline and even almost a theology of the monastic life, which was based on getting to heaven, which was the ultimate goal, by means of the immediate goal of conquering purity of heart, and therefore anticipating the kingdom. And there were two fronts on which they had to fight, both linked with the interior world of the thought, the noemata, the thoughts. And they saw that the battle had to be over impure thoughts and uncharitable thoughts. With regard to impure thoughts, the demon would use the imagination to fabricate all kinds of artificial presences in the mind to compensate for what was not there. With regard to unforgiveness, the demon would bring the image of people who had damaged them and hurt them, so that they could spend their time in thoughts of unpleasantness and bitterness. Does that sound slightly familiar? We need to be forgiving on a deep level. Unforgiveness is something which eats away, takes away the peace of the heart, and instead of warmth, gives coldness. And it can be detected. That coldness can be picked up. Is there true forgiveness? People who have experience of direction of souls will tell you that on the whole, it's easier to handle a monastery of men than a convent of women on that level, for this reason that men tend to have it out with each other, and sometimes quite strongly, but then they come down and forget it and move on, whereas women go inwards and things fester. And in an enclosed community of women, that can be quite damaging. Unforgiveness can be there. But it's true for any soul. It can be the case in a family. It can be the case even between boyfriend and girlfriend. If things aren't handled, if they're not brought up directly, they're there underground and it damages the relationship. What's the matter? It's not the same as it was, one asks. Well, the Lord himself does give the teaching about correction having to happen, that if there is something not right, then one has to bring it up. It's something which takes courage. But a certain discretion and privacy is involved, and there is a crescendo with regard to gravity and the way things have to be handled if they're really serious. If we have something against our brother, we have the right to discuss it calmly so as to bring it out. It can be better than a bad peace maintained for a long time and damaging our relationship all those years. The relationship in the church is discussed by St. Paul. In the church there in Corinth, for which he had a spiritual responsibility even at a distance, there were these factions, as though people were looking to those who had evangelized or baptized them more than to Christ. Interesting that the word Cephas is used here, showing that that was still around, the name given by the Lord himself in the original language to Simon initially, who becomes Simon Peter. It's the rock, the stone. So here we are invited to not get into that mode of even placing, for instance, the founder of an order over and above Christ. After all these charismatic figures that have founded and left a trace in history were icons of Christ, but Christ is the one to be looked at through them. The gospel is the same, the grace is the same. There are specific charismata, there are specific services to be done, but always the same Lord. Alas, on the level of the life of the church itself, what was thought to be initially only a temporary bust-up, the one that happened in 1054, is still not healed, even though in 1439 it was for a short time on paper healed at the Council of Florence. But the proof that it was thought to be only a passing thing is that in 1095 the East made appeal to the West, notably to the Pope himself from Byzantium, to come to the rescue of those Christians in the East, in Turkey, and also in the Holy Land that were having a rough time. That was the beginning of the Crusades. They did not think that was going to go on and on and on and on, because there had been similar feuds and bust-ups in the past. This is a tragedy which the Lord once healed. We know that. He did not mean this to happen. And if we were truly listening to what the Spirit was saying to the churches, we would, over the planet, have been also wanting to know, what does the Lord want with regard to forgiveness among Christians? And the first forgiveness ought to be between those who have the same sacraments in East and West. He did not mean us to have two dates for Easter. I conclude, to be a gospel person is to have evangelical reactions. That is concrete. Bad words, unpleasant gestures, and indications in the eyes are not evangelical in tone. Tenderness of regard, complete forgiveness, and generosity towards those who have upset us, not necessarily with huge cosmically dramatic events, but just a tone, are evangelical. And that is a grace to be asked for as we go through life, that we too may have something of the holiness of God, and we produce something of the temple in which the Lord takes pleasure and finds peace. We look after ourselves, e.g., even physically and also morally. The Lord does not like to have his temple contaminated with nicotine and smoke, alcohol, and things which damage us with regard to weight and size of body. It's concrete. The temple of the Lord needs to be looked after and also to be cleansed. The way we dress matters. Jeans are one thing, a certain dignity are another. The temple of the Holy Ghost is also physical, and we need to watch over all our being and be totally under the Lordship of Jesus Christ. Irish eyes. The Lord has given you a nice smile. There is a goodness yet upon this land, not made of man, not made of humankind, and there are corners where old moments stand, in poise, where noises new did not yet bind the all to utter progress, where a little while had time to be all that it need but be, where but a smile could yet know how to glow, and merrily. O little face that paced not hard in haste to please, but yet the next that never came. But me alone, for naught, for utter waste of energy o'erspent, not in thy name shall I e'er know. Yet know I shall, for days, the meaning of a ray that idly strays